Hi, Gators. Mrs. Collins here. It's time to continue reading Spring According to Humphrey. We left off a couple weeks ago, just before Easter, and we will continue with three more chapters today. We will start with the chapter 10, Spectacular Signs of Spring. Spring almost ruined my week at Cassie's house. Don't get me wrong, she took excellent care of me. She even took me out of my cage, which I enjoy especially when my friends make mazes for me to run. But Cassie was also worried about finding signs of spring. And as the week went on, she got more and more worried. Do some deep breathing, her mom said when Cassie moaned that she couldn't find one new thing to add to her list. I'm busy, Cammy said when Cassie begged her to help. Cassie's dad took her to the park one day. They were gone for hours, but when she came back, she was almost in tears. Sure, the grass is starting to turn green and the trees have buds on them, but they're already on the list. Mrs. Brisbane will be so upset if I can't find something, she said. I thought about Mrs. Brisbane was your favorite teacher ever, her dad said. She'll understand. But Cassie was still upset. The next day, Cassie's mom took her for a long walk around the neighborhood. I crossed my toes and hoped that their exercise would calm her down. I spent the day in my cage, napping, spinning, and on my wheel, and staring out the window. I missed Og. I missed my classmates. I even missed the specks. That afternoon, while I was thinking about them and looking out the window, I noticed something new. A small brown bird lit on a tree branch and then hopped a few inches just out of my view. I climbed to the top of my cage. I could see it. The bird hopped farther until I couldn't see it again. So I scurried over to the corner and stretched my neck. The bird was standing on the edge of a nest. A smaller brown bird was inside the nest. My neck was getting tired, but I kept staring at the nest. It was woven out of twigs, bits of mud, fluff, paper, and straw. It was a wonderful sight, and birds' nests are definitely signs of spring. I couldn't wait for Cassie to come back from her walk so she could see it too. When she returned, she looked very discouraged as she slumped down on her bed. Nothing new, she said. The signs of spring have stopped. I raced to the front of my cage and squeaked, No, no, no! There is a bird's nest right outside the window. Look! I tried to point, but since Cassie wasn't looking at me, it didn't matter. She sighed, I'll be the only one in room 26 without a new sign of spring. Look outside at the very edge of the window, I squeaked at the top of my lungs. Cassie didn't notice. As wonderful as they are, humans can be very frustrating at times. In fact, I was so frustrated that I jumped up and down. Please look! Cassie glanced over at me and smiled. Oh, Humphrey, you're so cute. Cute? I don't care about being cute. Okay, maybe a little bit. To squeak the truth, I was a little bit upset with Cassie until I realized that from where she was sitting, she couldn't see the tree branch. The curtain was blocking her view. Pull back the curtain, I squeaked. It's right outside the window. Cassie just sighed. Of course, once it was dark outside, there was no chance of Cassie seeing the nest. She left the room to have dinner and watch television with her family. As she did, I began to think. Squeaking at Cassie wasn't helping at all. Since she couldn't understand me, I needed to show her the nest. But how? Later, Cassie came back to her room for bedtime. She read for a while before her dad turned off the light. I hope you're not too disappointed in me, Humphrey, Cassie said. Then her breathing changed and I could tell that she was asleep. Her mom had closed the curtain completely when she said goodnight to Cassie, but there was a little opening that let some moonlight in. I stared at the moonlight a long time before I came up with a plan. I waited until the house was completely quiet, and then I carefully jiggled the lock that doesn't lock on my cage and tiptoed out onto the table. There was only about an inch of space between the table and the windowsill. I held my breath and I leaped. Whew! I was positively relieved to land safely. I stopped to catch my breath, then I began to push the curtain away from the window. I had no idea that a curtain could be so heavy. I pushed with all my might, and nothing happened. Whoa! I took a deep breath, pushed again, and the curtains slowly began to move. The great thing about those curtains was that when I pushed the left curtain, the right curtain also moved. With a deep breath, a few rest stops, I managed to push the curtain as far as it would go. Once I caught my breath, I stopped to look at the moon, and then I looked down. The silvery light was shining on the nest tucked in the branches of the tree. I was closer now and couldn't see much better. I stared for a while because it was so round and cozy, almost as cozy as my little sleeping hut. I crossed my toes and hoped that in the morning Cassie would see the nest too. By the time I returned to my cage and closed the door behind me, I was feeling unsqueakably tired. I sank down into my bedding and stared up at the moon until suddenly it was morning. I'd slept through most of the night, which is quite a feat for a hamster. Good morning, Humphrey, said Cassie as she looked in my cage. Don't look at me, look out the window. There's a spectacular sign of spring, I squeaked excitedly. Cassie yawned. Ready for breakfast? Her dad asked as he poked his head in the doorway. I made pancakes and sausage and biscuits, scrambled eggs, and pizza. Really? Cassie flapped her hands excitedly. Her dad laughed. April Fools. He didn't you look at the calendar? It's April 1st. April Fool's Day. Cassie laughed and then turned serious. What are we really having for breakfast? The good news is we are having pancakes, he said with a smile. Yay! Cassie raced out of the room. Why would Cassie's dad fib about all the things he made for breakfast? Because it was April Fool's Day. Why is there a day to celebrate being foolish? I will never figure out humans. I sighed. The cozy nest was now in plain view, only Cassie wasn't there to see it. I thought of making a sign saying bird's nest with a big arrow pointing to the window. But if I did that, Cassie would know that I can read and write and get out of my cage. Those are things I like to keep a secret. Cassie and her mom came back in a little while. I'll make the bed if you pick up your clothes, her mom said, and they got to work. Please look out the window, I squeaked. Why is Humphrey squeaking like that? Cassie's mom asked. Cassie giggled. He's talking. Yes, I squeaked at the top of my lungs. I'm trying to tell you to look out the window. Cassie and her mom just laughed. After they straightened up the room, Cassie's mom said, Wow, it's really bright this morning. I crossed my toes and hoped. Cassie's mom walked across the room to the window. I'll just close these a little. No, 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 I screamed. My heart sunk as she started to pull the curtains together after I'd worked so hard to open them. And then she stopped. Cassie, come here, she said. Look at that branch. She pointed and Cassie looked. I don't see anything except leaves, she said. I held my breath. Look again, her mom said. Cassie gasped and clasped her hands. It's a nest, she shouted, and she danced around in a circle. Oh, Mom, it's a nest. Calm down, Cassie, her mom said. You'll scare the birds away. Cassie took a deep breath. I could tell she was trying to stay calm. I can't believe it, Cassie whispered. We're so close. I think you found your sign of spring, her mom said as she hurried out of the room. I'm going to get your dad and Cammy. I could breathe again. My plan had worked. For the rest of the time at Cassie's house, the whole family came to watch the birds. The female must be sitting on some eggs, Cassie's dad said. Watch how the male bird brings her food. Cammy gave Cassie tips on how to get the best photos. Cassie's dad printed the photos out for her. And Cassie's mom found a book in the library about how birds build nests. Look, there's my old pink shoelace. Cassie pointed to the nest and Cammy took a picture. Cassie took notes, made drawings, and even made a video of the male bringing food for the female. Once in a while, she left the nest to get food, and the male stayed behind. They're so wonderful. How can we help them? Cassie asked her mother. Cassie's mom had an idea. She took Cassie to the store to buy bird seed and a feeder so it would be easier for the birds to have food. Cassie took more pictures of the birds, taking turns going to the feeder. The birds worked hard together and helped each other, just like Cassie's family. I had a little pang as I thought about how wonderful families really were. I wished I'd had one too. On Sunday, my last day at Cassie's, some very surprising things happened. First of all, Cassie and Cammy took baskets and ran through the yard picking up brightly colored eggs. They said the Easter Bunny had left them. But why an Easter Bunny? Why not an Easter hamster? They also ate a good amount of chocolate, which they didn't share. That's a good thing because candy isn't healthy for hamsters to eat. The other surprising thing that happened on Sunday was that the small brown bird flew off while the father bird stood guard on the edge of the nest. That's when we saw them. Three small, speckled eggs. Cassie managed to take a photo just before the mother bird returned to the nest. I never thought the sight of three eggs would be so wonderful, even more exciting than the eggs left by the Easter Bunny. I can't wait for school tomorrow, Cassie told me. That night, I'll have the best sign of spring in room 26. I think you're right, I squeaked. When class began on Monday morning, Cassie ran up to Mrs. Brisbane and asked, "Are we going to share our signs of spring this morning?" "Yes," Mrs. Brisbane uh, said. "Did you find some?" "Yes." Cassie nodded. "I found something wonderful." Our teacher smiled and told Cassie to take her seat. Tell the truth, Thomas entered with a shocked look on his face. "It's starting to snow," he said. Mrs. Brisbane looked surprised. I looked out the window and saw that it was a beautiful, sunny spring day. Suddenly, Thomas grinned. "April Fools!" Mrs. Brisbane smiled and said, "This isn't April 1st, Thomas." "I know," Thomas said, "but we were on break for April Fool's Day, so I had to do it today." Just before the bell rang, Joey arrived, carrying the aquarium. It was covered with a cloth, so I couldn't see inside. He walked very slowly and set it down so carefully. "Wait till you see Og," Joey whispered. Boing, boing, boing. Og jumped up and down on a rock. Rosie rolled her wheelchair toward the aquarium. "Let's see." "Not now," Mrs. Brisbane said. "Joey will uncover it when we talk about our signs of spring. Right, Joey?" Joey smiled and nodded. He looked like he had a big, happy secret. Normally, I wouldn't change a thing Mrs. Brisbane does, but that morning I wished she wouldn't make us study our vocabulary words first thing in the morning. How could I think about words like wander, observe, and drift when I observed that my mind was wandering and drifting to thoughts about that covered aquarium? I think many of my friends had the same problem because they kept sneaking glances at our table by the window. At last, it was time for recess, and my friends all hurried to the playground, leaving me staring at a piece of cloth. I concentrated on looking out the window instead and noticed the first drops of rain beginning to fall. "I guess our students will be back soon," Mrs. Brisbane said out loud. Suddenly, a few drops of rain turned to millions of drops of rain. My classmates returned to room 26 quickly, and they were dripping wet. Mrs. Brisbane gave them paper towels to dry their arms and faces. "We still have a few minutes of recess," she said. "What would you like to do?" "See what's in the aquarium." Excuse me. "Tell the truth," Thomas shouted. Everyone else agreed, including me. Even Og said, "Boing, boing." Mrs. Brisbane took her chalk and stood by our signs of spring list on the board. "What did you find over spring break?" she asked. Holly held up a beautiful photo of a tree with white flowers. "It's a dogwood," she said, which was strange because it didn't look anything like a dog. My friends had seen pink trees and red birds and blackbirds. Tall Paul held up a large drawing of a nose. "What's that?" Mrs. Brisbane asked. "I have allergies in the spring," he said. "They make my nose run." Everybody laughed, but I didn't understand. Your nose is attached to your face. How can it run? And where does it go? "Allergies are very unpleasant signs of spring," Mrs. Brisbane agreed. "Calm down," Cassie waved her arm until I thought it would fall off. Mrs. Brisbane finally called on her. "Two birds built a nest right outside my bedroom," she said, "and there are eggs." She held up a page of photos. "I have video too. It was the most wonderful thing I've ever seen." "I saw it too," I squeaked. Small Paul shared his temperature chart that showed that it was continuing to get warmer and warmer. "What about the tadpoles?" Rosie asked. "I just can't wait." Mrs. Brisbane waited until the end to call on Joey. "I guess it's time," Mrs. Brisbane said. It was time, all right, though I was a tiny bit worried about what I'd see in that tank. Humphrey's spring things. I hadn't seen Specs for all of spring break. What kind of changes did those two make? Chapter 11, Uncle Og. Joey had a huge grin as he walked over to our table and stood next to the aquarium. It's not easy to take care of tadpoles, he said, but I followed all of the directions and he pulled the cloth off the tank. They have little legs now, and if you look closely, you can see their heads are changing. Joey looked so proud. I thought he'd burst. The rest of our classmates jumped out of their seats and rushed toward the aquarium. Mrs. Brisbane got them to line up and calm down. Og, however, didn't calm down one bit. Boing, 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 he twanged as he jumped up and down. I have never seen him so excited. Somehow, our teacher made sure my friends looked at the tank one by one. Fantastic, Thomas said. Ooh, see those bumps? Rosie said. I think that's the beginning of their arms. Every single classmate said that the tadpoles were more amazing, spectacular, wonderful, awesome things they'd ever seen in their lives. Really? Hadn't they seen me leap onto the wheel and leap off again without falling? Hadn't they seen me swing across the top of my cage? Of course, they hadn't seen my adventures outside of my cage, but if they had, they'd think I was amazing and wonderful too. Not to mention the fact that I can read and write. Growing legs and bumpy arms, that took no work at all. Cassie wasn't as excited as the other students. That's very interesting, she said, but have you ever seen birds build a nest? I haven't, Mrs. Brisbane said, but I'd like to. Thanks for sharing your pictures with us. Yes, thanks, Cassie, helpful Holly said. I'd love to see the baby birds hatch. Cassie invited Holly over to her house, and I could tell she felt a lot better. I would have liked to see the baby birds hatch too. I'd been a little upset with Mrs. Brisbane for making us wait for the unveiling of the tadpoles, but I was happy, happy, happy when she let the students take time to watch them. Not that they did much, but they didn't look like specks anymore, and that was interesting to everybody. I think it was especially interesting to Og. Boing, boing, he said, when he jumped into the water to do some serious splashing. After that, he went back to his rock and looked over at the aquarium. Boing, 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 he exclaimed in a very loud voice. I think Og likes them, Nicole said. I wasn't so sure about that. Maybe he remembers being a tadpole too, Harry said. We should name them, Thomas suggested. How about Tad and Pole? Some of my friends groaned at that idea. Then Simon said, we should call Og Uncle. Everybody loved that idea, except maybe me. Uncle Og, they repeated. Boing, boing, Og joined in. I was unsqueakably relieved when it was time for lunch and my friends had to leave the classroom. I needed a break. Besides, I hadn't had a chance to get a good look at the tadpoles myself. Once the room was quiet, which it hadn't been all morning, I moved to the side of my cage closest to the aquarium and looked. The specks were bigger, and yes, they actually did have legs. They had round things that looked a little bit like heads if you used your imagination. Luckily, I have a good imagination. Then I looked across the aquarium to see Og. Og had a huge head. He was green. He had strong legs. The tadpoles didn't look anything like him. So why were my friends calling him Uncle Og? If he was the tadpole's uncle, was I their uncle too? Just because he was a frog, did that mean they were in the same family? And where was my family anyway? So what do you think, Og? I squeaked. Do you like tadpoles? He was completely silent, so I kept talking. I can't believe how much they changed. No answer. Do you remember being a tadpole? I asked. Boing, Og's voice boomed. I'm not sure, but I think maybe he didn't remember. I don't remember being a baby hamster either. At least, I don't think I do. After that, Og didn't make any noise at all. I wondered if he dozed off. You can never tell with a frog. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Brisbane told the class that she had an idea for family fun night. Since we have animals in our classroom, I thought we could have fun doing animal activities for the circus, she explained. Helpful Holly waved her hand. Ooh, I saw a lady in a pink dress standing on the back of a horse at the circus, and they were going round and round the ring really fast. Well, I don't think we'll be doing that, Mrs. Brisbane chuckled. Mrs. Wright would not approve of horses racing around the gym. We all laughed at the thought of that. I was thinking that we could have activities that have to do with hamsters and frogs, she said. Calm down, Cassie waved her hand. We made a hamster maze in the after school program. We could set up a maze, like an obstacle course, and people could buy a ticket to run through it, Harry suggested. We could time them. If they beat the clock, they get a prize. Mrs. Brisbane nodded. I like that idea, Harry. Kelsey's hand shot up. Ooh, we could have the parents and their kids do a leapfrog race. The thought of my friends' parents leaping around like frogs was unsqueakably funny to me. Boing, boing. I guess I'd like the idea. And I thought we could have some of you take turns as ringmaster or ringmastresses to draw people in, said Mrs. Brisbane. I want to do that, Rosie said. Great, let's take a vote, Mrs. Brisbane said. Who would like room 26 to sign up to do animal acts? Every single hand shot up. I raised my paw. Og said, boing. I don't think he can actually raise one leg at a time. Sophie asked, can Humphrey and Og be in the gym too, and the tadpoles? Mrs. Brisbane said, Wright won't like that, but I think Mr. Morales will. And after all, he is her boss. I'll see what I can do. There were cheers and applause. Mrs. Brisbane wasn't finished. Since we're getting ready for Family Fun Night, I have an assignment that has to do with families and how they grow. She asked Holly to pass around sheets of paper. We're all going to make family trees, she said. A family tree shows the people who live in your family now, and it also shows who your relatives from the past were. You are going to build yours branch by branch. I was confused. I may not remember my family, but I'm pretty sure they didn't grow on trees, and neither do human families. To start with, for your homework tonight, I want you to write your name at the bottom of the tree. There's a space for it, she continued. And then, on the lowest branch, write the name of your mother on the right side and your father on the left side. Holly raised her hand. You mean Janet and Steve? Those are my parents' names. Their full names, including your mother's maiden name, Mrs. Brisbane replied. That's her last name from when she was a girl. Some moms keep their last name, and some take their husband's. Daniel frowned. I have no idea what my mom's maiden name is. Ask her, our teacher said. Then want you to draw apples hanging from the tree to show your brothers and sisters, if you have any. Write their names in the apples. Sophie was already at work. Timothy, she said, as she wrote on her paper. Mrs. Brisbane, I have a half-sister, Nicole said. A half-sister? I'd never heard of such a thing. Which half was she? My mom and dad got divorced, she continued. My mom married my stepdad, and they had my sister. Where do I put that? Oh, so that's what a half-sister is. Make an apple on the tree for her. All kinds of sisters and brothers should be included, Mrs. Brisbane said. You don't have to do it now. Bring it in tomorrow. As usual, I didn't get a sheet, so I wasn't sure what a family tree looked like or why my brothers and sisters were apples. My friends raced out of the room, but Thomas hung back with a worried look on his face. Mrs. Brisbane, he said when all the students were gone, I don't know what to put on my tree because I'm adopted. That doesn't make any difference, she said. Do you live with someone that you call mom or dad? Thomas nodded. Both. And do you love them and they love you back? She asked. Thomas nodded again. Then those are your parents, Mrs. Brisbane said. The people who love you and take care of you. Write their names on the family tree. Okay, Thomas said. I wasn't sure what that was all about, so I hopped on my wheel for good, a good long spin to try and figure things out. After my spin, I crawled into my sleeping hut, and by the time I woke up, it was dark outside. It was too late to visit Gigi, even though I wanted to tell her about our family fun night plans. Og was quiet, so I sat and waited for Aldo to arrive. I was eager to see what he thought of the tadpoles. They were quiet, too. Suddenly, the door opened and the lights came on. Greetings, Aldo, I squeaked. After all, I hadn't seen my friend for more than a week. I was shocked to see that the person pulling his cleaning cart into room 26 wasn't Aldo at all. It was a complete stranger. You're not Aldo, I squeaked. Boing, boing, Og chimed in. The tadpoles didn't make a sound either. The stranger was much shorter than Aldo, and he didn't have that nice, furry mustache that Aldo has. But he did have rusty colored hair and a rusty colored beard to match. He pulled in the cart and looked around the room. Nice and neat, he said. That was true. Mrs. Brisbane's room was always nice and neat. Then he saw our table by the windowsill. Oh, he said, Aldo left me a note about you. As he walked toward our table, I squeaked, Where's Aldo? And who are you? He fumbled around in his pocket and pulled out a carrot stick. Aldo told me to give the hamster a treat. I guess that's you. Of course it's me, I squeaked. Does anyone else around here look like a hamster? He pushed the carrot stick between the bars of my cage. Thank you, I said, even though I had no idea who this person was. The man scratched his head and looked around. He said to give the frog something. Luckily, he spotted the jar of froggy fish sticks. Ah, he said. He opened the jar, took out a few sticks, and threw them into Og's tank. Boing, boing, my froggy friend said. The man scratched his head again, and he stared at the tadpoles. He didn't tell me what to do about you, he said. He leaned in closer to look at them. Whatever you are. I understood the confusion. Who are you? I squeaked. Sorry, I don't know the ropes, the man said. I'm just filling in for Aldo. His wife had twins, a boy and a girl. Yay, 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 I squeaked. Did you hear that, Og? Boing, 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 Og replied. The man smiled. Aldo said you guys have a lot of personality. Aldo has a lot of personality too. I tried to picture a baby girl who looked like his wife, Maria, and a son who looked like Aldo. Did he have a mustache like his dad? The man took his broom and began to sweep the floor. He didn't do funny things Aldo did, like balancing a broom on one finger, but he swept and dusted, straightened the tables, and worked very hard. I'm telling you, even if you can't understand me, I really need this job, he said. But it's Aldo's job, I squeaked. I was happy when Og agreed. Boing, boing. He's about to graduate from college, and if he gets a teaching job, I hope I can move up to being a full time custodian. He said, Right now, I just fill in when someone can't make it. He stopped talking, but I kept listening. After a while, he spoke again. I have a wife and kids too, he said. The store where I worked closed down, and I've only been able to find part time work. He stopped and looked over at us. Hey, why am I talking to a hamster and a frog? Because we're listening, I squeaked. Boing, Og said. The room looked fresh and shiny as the man stopped and leaned on his broom. I'd do anything to get this job, he said, as long as Aldo has a better job. He's a good guy. The best, 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 I agreed. The man was finished, but as he pulled his cart toward the door, he said, My name is Bob, and I hope I see you again. He switched off the light, and I sat there in the dark for a long, long time. Og, Aldo wants to be a teacher, I squeaked, and I want what Aldo wants. But what will it be like when he's not here every night? Og leaped into the water side of his tank and splashed around. If Aldo can't be here every night, I hope Bob gets the job, I said. Then I moved toward the window and looked up at the moon. I'll miss Aldo so much, I squeaked, but Bob needs a job too, and he did give us treats. Boing, boing. I was glad that Og agreed with me. Humphrey's spring things. I'm happy for Aldo, he's my friend, but I'd hate to see the good times end. Chapter 12, Family Matters. The next morning, my classmates ran over to our tables to check on the tadpoles. They didn't even say good morning to me. To squeak the truth, I was trying not to look at the tadpoles. Look, Simon shouted as he raced to our table. Wow! I couldn't help it. I hurried to the side of my cage to look at my neighbors. There they were, swimming around their aquarium. Their heads and legs had changed overnight. They didn't look exactly like frogs, but they were definitely not specks anymore. My friends all crowded around the aquarium. Joey opened his notebook and began to sketch. When Cassie arrived, her cheeks were pink and her eyes sparkled. I can't believe it. I found another nest in the front yard and it has 4 eggs in it. Everyone gathered around her to see a photo she'd taken. Aw, they said, and they're so cute. I'm calling the first eggs Eeny, Meeny, and Mo, Cassie said, and now I have to think of 4 more names. We still need to give the tadpoles names, Helpful Holly said. How about Nog and Yog, after their uncle Og, Daniel suggested. Og leaped up and twanged, boing, boing. My friends giggled, but I didn't see what was so funny. How about Dippity, Kelsey said. Dippy and Lippy. Dippy and Hippy. Thomas shook his head. Those aren't good names. I still think they should be Tad and Paul. No one else liked that idea. Simon said, Max and Mickey. Tall Paul said, Max and Mickey. Rosie frowned. What makes you think they're boys? One of them might be a girl. Both of them might be girls, Nicole said. They argued in a friendly way, and finally Rosie said, Flip and Flap. That doesn't sound like boys or girls. I like those names, and so did my friends. Welcome to room 26, Flip and Flap, Mrs. Brisbane said. Now, students, please take your seats. We started the day by reviewing my classmates' family trees. It was fascinating to hear the names of my friends' parents. Next, Mrs. Brisbane showed them where to add their grandparents' names. Grandma and Grandpa, Harry said. Simon grinned. Bubby and Zadie. Abula and Abulo, Felipe said. Rolling Rosie gave them a thumbs up. Mine too. Goodness, there were so many names for grandmother and grandfather. Poppy and Jima, Granny and Gramps, Papa and May. One thing for sure, Mrs. Brisbane said, no matter what you call them, you all love your grandparents. Tonight, please add their real names, first and last. Then we'll add your aunts, uncles, and cousins. I'll hand out an example that shows you where to put them. I have lots of cousins. Stop talking, Sophie said. Mrs. Brisbane nodded. Then you'll have a lot of apples on your tree. Felipe said, let's make Humphrey's family tree. The whole class thought that was a good idea, but I wasn't sure I had a family tree or even a family. Who were Humphrey's mom and dad? Sophie asked. Where did he come from? Mrs. Brisbane thought for a moment. Ms. Mack got him at Pet-O-Rama. I didn't remember my family, but I did remember Pet-O-Rama and the wonderful day Ms. Mack chose me for the classroom pet in room 26. Of course, I didn't know she was a substitute for Mrs. Brisbane at the time, and I didn't know she'd be leaving Longfellow School for a while. I'm glad she came back. Humphrey must have a family, Nicole said. I must have, I agreed. I remembered Carl and some of the other humans who worked at Pet-O-Rama and took care of us in the small animal department, but I didn't think of them as family. They never even talked to me. Mrs. Brisbane said that when humans or animals grow up, they leave their families and go out on their own. Most of you will move out of your parents' home when you grow up, she said, but smaller animals grow up faster than humans, so they can leave their mothers much sooner. Does anyone here have a dog that they got as a puppy? Some hands went up, including Joey's. Dogs are usually adopted by human families when they're puppies. How long does it take for a puppy to be ready to leave its mother? She asked. Joey said, Skipper was about 8 weeks old. He wasn't grown up until he was about a year old, but he still acts like a puppy sometimes. So it only takes a year for a dog to grow up, our teacher continued, and it takes an even shorter time for hamsters to be ready to leave their families. That's sad, Rosie said. Not really, Mrs. Brisbane said. It's natural. And if Humphrey stayed with his mother or Skipper stayed with his dog family, we wouldn't be able to have them as pets. Mrs. Brisbane was right, as usual. If I had stayed with my family or even stayed at Pet-O-Rama, I wouldn't have the job of a classroom pet. It's the best job in the world. Cassie glanced over at a table. I guess Og doesn't remember his family. After all, tadpoles are on their own from the very beginning, she said. Og looks sad, Rosie said. I think he looks as if he's smiling, Mrs. Brisbane said. Look at his mouth. I wasn't sure, but my friends chuckled, and soon the subject changed. When Mrs. Brisbane announced another math quiz, I scurried to the front of my cage and looked at Cassie. As usual, she looked worried. When she glanced over at my cage, I immediately hopped on my wheel and began to spin. Cassie stared at me, and then she closed her eyes and took some deep, long breaths. Mrs. Brisbane passed out the test papers. Cassie took a few more deep breaths. I hopped off my wheel and watched her carefully. She didn't stare at her paper. She didn't hold her stomach. Cassie picked up her pencil and began to read the questions. She stopped every now and then to take a good long breath, and then she wrote down her answers. She looked over at my cage from time to time, and I tried to be encouraging. You can do it, Cassie, I said. You don't have to be perfect. You just do your best. Cassie finished the test before most of my other classmates. When she was finished, she sat back in her chair and smiled. I was smiling too, though I'm pretty sure no one else knew it. On her way out of the classroom for lunch, Mrs. Brisbane asked Cassie how the math quiz went. I think I did pretty well, Cassie said, and my stomach didn't hurt. At the end of the day, Mrs. Brisbane made an announcement. I think some of you know Aldo Amato, our nighttime custodian. She said, he's Richie Rinaldi's uncle. Yay, Richie, I squeaked. He was one of my friends from last year's class. Aldo's wife just gave birth to twins, Mrs. Brisbane continued with a smile. A boy and a girl. The boy is named Marco, after Aldo's father. The girl is named Anna, after Maria's mother. My friends began to clap. Marco and Anna. I didn't clap my paws, but I loudly squeaked, yes, yes, yes. As they filed out of room 26, I heard my classmates buzzing about the new babies. They were as excited as I was. As soon as the classroom was emptied, I jiggled the lock that doesn't lock and scurried over to Og's tank. Marco and Anna, I squeaked, a boy and a girl. Boing, he replied. Then I glanced over at Flip and Flap, swimming in their aquarium. They were also twins. I'd almost forgotten that Aldo was my old pal Richie's uncle. Was Og really an uncle too? Suddenly it seemed as if everybody in the world had a family, except me. I wasn't sure whether Aldo would be coming in to clean that night or if it would be Bob or some other stranger, but I wanted to make sure Gigi knew about the twins. So I took a chance and slid down the table leg and raced out of room 26. Gigi was still awake when I made my way up her cage. I'm glad you came, Humphrey, she said softly. I wanted to tell you about Aldo's wife, Maria. Had twins, a boy and a girl, I said. Twins? Gigi seemed confused. I explained that when humans have two babies at the same time, they're called twins. Oh, Gigi said, that's very good news. And that guy who came in to clean last night, he's just filling in for Aldo, I said. Oh, Gigi repeated. I was a little scared when he came, but he was nice. I'm sure Aldo will be back tonight, I said. Gigi moved a little closer to me. Humphrey, I'm worried about something. What's wrong? I asked. For the circus night, Ms. Mack told us that our booth is called the Clown Toss. Are people really going to throw clowns? That doesn't sound very nice, she said. It didn't sound nice at all. Throwing things at people or animals isn't nice at all, especially if the people are funny and like to make people laugh, like clowns. I think she might have been joking, I said, or maybe you misunderstood what she said. Gigi nodded. I hope so. And something else. The children want me to wear a clown hat, but guinea pigs don't like to wear clothes. Neither do hamsters, I said. I think that's because we're already wearing our fur coats. Gigi giggled. You always make me feel better, Humphrey. I was glad I'd made Gigi feel better, but I didn't feel so great myself when the door opened later that night. I was looking forward to congratulating Aldo, but instead, Bob was back. Me again, he said as he pulled his cart through the door. Hi, I said. Even though I was disappointed, I didn't want to hurt Bob's feelings. He dusted for a while and he remembered to give Og and me our treats. I told my kids about you, he said. Now they want a hamster and a frog too. Boing. Og sounded pleased. Bob was an unsqueakably nice human, but I still missed Aldo. I wondered whether he was ever coming back to room 26, and if not, why hadn't he at least told us goodbye? That night I had a dream. I don't remember it very clearly, but there was a large, soft, furry creature who smelled wonderful, and I was snuggled up against this creature, along with some other small bits of fur. I felt so peaceful next to her, and I heard her say something to me. Remember this, she squeaked. No matter where you go, you'll always be my special golden boy. I woke up with a start and squeaked, Mother! The only answer was Og's loud boing. Sorry, I told him. I think I had a dream about my mother and some brothers and sisters, too. Boing, Og replied. I didn't tell him the rest of my dream. After all, he probably didn't remember his mother or father at all. And he was green, not a golden boy like me. Humphrey Spring Things. I felt a little sad to see no branches on my family tree. And that, boys and girls, finishes chapter 12. Next week, we will do chapter 13 and finish the book. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you're well. I hope you're finding signs of spring out there, even though it's still snowing on some days and frosty. It is spring.